Former President Donald Trump has been hit with a new lawsuit today. Members of the Central Park Five filed a defamation suit against Trump, accusing the former president of spreading false, misleading, and defamatory statements about their 1989 case during the ABC presidential debate. During a segment on race and politics, Trump stated that, quote, they said they pled guilty, continuing on to say they, quote, killed a person ultimately. The lawsuit notes that the five members never pleaded guilty and the victim wasn't killed. It also notes that Trump's comments were made with a reckless disregard for their falsity to tens of millions watching. The Trump campaign spokesperson Stephen Chung slammed the lawsuit in a statement, saying this is just another frivolous election interference suit. Members of the Central Park Five are seeking an unspecified amount of damages. Millions of Americans across the United States have cast early ballots in the 2024 presidential election. While Democrats in the past have had the advantage of early voters, this year could be a bit different, as former President Trump and Republicans have adjusted messaging on the practice, looking to secure wins in key battleground states. Joining me now is the Hill's congressional reporter Mychael Schnell with the latest updates from the campaign trail. Mychael, it's great to see you. Let's jump into it. Early voting in Georgia continues to break records every day. So far, more than 1 million people have cast their ballots early. We know that Vice President Harris spent much of her weekend in the state visiting 2 Atlanta area churches as a part of a nationwide Souls to the Polls push. She was also campaigning with singer and R&B artist Usher in Atlanta this week. So with 2 weeks to go until Election Day, what else is her campaign doing in the state?
Yeah, Julia, today we're going to see Vice President Kamala Harris crisscross Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And we have spoken a lot about those 3 states because they are among the most pivotal swing states in terms of this election. Whoever wants to win the White House is going to have to win some or all of those states. So we're going to see Vice President Kamala Harris there with a special guest, former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney. They're participating in a few conversations together. Cheney, of course, endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris recently and has since done some campaign events with her, trying to attract some disaffected Republicans, folks who aren't enchanted by former President Trump. So we're going to have to see how that pans out. But yes, Vice President Kamala Harris today going to be visiting those 3 swing states after, as you mentioned, spending a lot of time in the state of Georgia. Former President Trump, meanwhile, we're going to see him in North Carolina today.
Yeah, so I want to zero in on North Carolina because the State Board of Elections there also announced that just over 1 million early votes have been cast. Like you said, Trump will be making several stops across the state to survey damage from Hurricane Helene, and lawmakers in the state have already passed legislation aimed at making it easier for residents affected by the storm to vote. So, Mychael, are Republicans worried at all that GOP turnout in the area could impact Trump's chances of winning the state? We know that, in the western part of the state, for example, which was very hard hit, that's very Republican territory.
Well, turnout is always the name of the game. I think that one moment of solace that both campaigns can have is the fact that Election Day is still 2 weeks away. So there can be some changes in terms of how bad the progress and pace of the recovery period and things like that. But I mean, absolutely, especially when you have an election that is so closely divided like this one, not to mention North Carolina, which is one of those, again, key swing states. It's anybody's game. And a lot of the time, it'll depend on who turns out to vote and which party has more of their voters heading to the ballot boxes. So I do think that turnout could impact things at the end of the day. But as of now, we're still 2 weeks out, so I don't think it's a done deal. And I don't think we can draw any conclusions just yet because that is plenty of time for recovery processes to accelerate.
I want to turn our attention to the latest September fundraising numbers. They are out, and the Harris campaign outraced the Trump campaign 3-1, bringing in $221 million compared to Trump's $63 million haul. Now, Harris has raised $1 billion in the 3 months of her campaign. Mychael, how is Trump looking to combat this massive fundraising disparity? But at the same time, though, we've seen that money doesn't always make a difference, that, Trump has overcome this in the past.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And I think that, we've talked about the polling for Vice President Kamala Harris sort of recalibrating after that extreme momentum and enthusiasm about her becoming the nominee. But it's clear that it's still reverberating in the fundraising realm because she's still putting up these massive numbers. One thing that I found interesting is we're seeing former President Trump really embrace somebody like Elon Musk, who has put a lot of money into his campaign, someone who has a lot of money himself. We've been seeing Elon Musk not just support Trump through fundraising, but also on the campaign trail. We saw him at that Butler, Pennsylvania rally. We saw him rally voters with former President Trump over the weekend. So we're sort of seeing him embrace some of these billionaires like Elon Musk. Whether or not that'll help him actually accumulate money and narrow that gap between him and Vice President Kamala Harris remains to be seen. But I think this is what happened after Vice President Kamala Harris assumed the top of the ticket. They really did see this fundraising boom, and clearly it is still happening.
Yeah, definitely. And I want to turn to the Harris campaign, or I should say stick with the Harris campaign. She is continuing her Blue Wall Blitz this week, this time with former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney, who of course is an outspoken critic of Trump. How is the Harris campaign looking to utilize, her Republican ties, Mychael? A lot of Republican strategists I talk to who are pro-Trump say that Liz Cheney is not necessarily connecting with the majority of Republican voters like former President Trump is.
Yeah, well, this is where we're seeing Liz Cheney again in these key swing states, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. It's places where those states can really determine who wins this election. I think that we've seen that former President Trump does not have very high favorables, right? He has high unfavorables. I think that the Harris campaign is hoping that there are enough or some or enough disaffected Republicans out there that maybe Liz Cheney can convince a few of them here and there, particularly a few of them here and there in those key swing states, and let that be enough to maybe tip the election in her favor. Now, of course, it is a bet that they are making, and it's a hope that they have. Whether or not that'll be the case, we'll have to see. There are so few undecided voters in this election overall. But when the race is so close, I mean, we have seen these surveys, these polls, they are virtually most of them are within the margin of error. The campaigns are thinking that anything could help, and they don't want to leave anything. They don't want to be on election day and regret that they didn't try one strategy. So right now we're seeing the Liz Cheney strategy play out.
So while we're in the midst of this very narrow race between Harris and Trump, we're seeing that courts around the U.S. are bracing for what they say will be an eventual onslaught of lawsuits surrounding the election results, as the courtroom has really turned into the latest battlefront in this election. We saw that happen in 2020 as well. Republicans have now turned their sights on overseas voting. Tell me more about what the GOP is arguing and what states their lawsuits are really focused in.
Yeah, this is a new legal front that is developing in terms of the Republicans' sort of efforts against the election and things like that. Of course, we saw this play out in 2020. So now we're trying to see what's going to happen and what's happening right now in 2024. There were judges in two battleground states, again, two of them we spoke about before, Michigan and Wisconsin, that heard Republican arguments that officials have been improperly accepting thousands of ballots from overseas. And they're saying that that could be an opening for some potential fraud. Now, I do want to note overseas ballots make up such a small number and percentage of ballots overall. Officials in 2020 only counted about 890,000 ballots nationwide. So it's a very small number in the grand scheme of things. But there are Republicans who are saying that the group could tip the scales when you're talking about such close elections. So we are seeing some Republicans bring this up in the court system. Whether or not it'll be successful in terms of those challenges, whether or not this will be the case remains to be seen. But it just shows that Republicans are sort of laying the foundation for some of these arguments just in preparation for what could happen on election day.
Yeah, I mean, I keep saying we probably won't know the election results on election night or maybe even the morning after, but the craziness will not end because we likely will see these lawsuits. So we will be looking out for that. Mychael Schnell, as always, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Julia.
The 2024 Atlantic hurricane season has been one for the history books, but it's not over yet. Over the weekend, Hurricane Oscar made landfall in Cuba as a Category 1 storm. It came just days after the island nation's power grid collapsed Friday, causing the worst blackout since Hurricane Ian made landfall as a Category 3 storm back in 2022. While Oscar looks to be headed back out to sea, cleanup continues in Florida from Hurricane Milton. In the Tampa area, some residents say they were caught off guard by the flood levels. Georgia MacArthur with Nexstar Nation's WFLA has a look at the help heading to the region.
While parts of Tampa were better prepared for the storms, residents in town and country faced unexpected destruction. Floodwaters devastated several communities across Hillsborough County. The impact was especially hard in town and country.
And I've never seen anything like this. When my community and my city and my county hurt, I hurt. And we should all hurt. To that end, this community in particular, they got sucker punched with a left hook.
Local leaders are responding with aid to help the community get back on their feet.
What made this neighborhood so special is that it wasn't asked to evacuate and it flooded anyway. And that has created a lot of extra challenges that we wanted to make sure that we came here to specifically address.
In response, a generous donation from the Adele Burnett Memorial Fund to provide relief to those who need it most.
Myself as executor are going to commit $100,000 to help folks in this community who have been not only personally, emotionally affected by this, but most importantly, financially.
Officials are also focused on debris removal and investigating infrastructure issues.
These streets that were recently repaved just in the past few years appear to be flooding worse than they were before the projects were done. And we need to find out what the problem is, and we need to find out whether or not it contributed to the unprecedented flooding that we saw during Hurricane Milton.
Leaders also mentioned they will be reviewing drainage systems to ensure this type of flooding doesn't happen again. Recovery efforts are expected to continue over the course of the next couple of weeks as the community works to rebuild. Reporting in Hillsborough County, I'm Georgia MacArthur, 8 on your side.
And thank you to Georgia for that report. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Julia Manchester. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to the Hills YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.